You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode I'm chatting to a neuroscience expert, writer and author living with cystic fibrosis. Born with a genetic disorder, this week's guest had no ordinary childhood. Living in 23 different countries before the age of 18, as her family struggled to finance her illness, she became an incredibly imaginative kid, a trait that would soon become the foundation blocks to her future career success. Being fired from a job in recruitment due to multiple hospitalisations, the ambitious entrepreneur found herself on social security disability. Little did she know at the time that while couch surfing off Craigslist, she had reached the beginning of her pivotal adventure. Surviving well past her estimated life expectancy of 14, the now 30-year-old hasn't let anything hold her down. Writing a book from the hospital bed, speaking on stages across the US, and becoming an expert in the field of neurolinguistic programming, here's what it's like to be Klyn Elsbury. Before we get stuck into the episode, I just wanted to say that if there is a drop in sound quality throughout, I'm very sorry, but in respect of social distancing during COVID-19, I've had to record episodes remotely. In this challenging time, we're all trying our best, so I really hope everyone is staying safe and that you enjoy the episode. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I really appreciate you giving up your time. I think it will be a really good starting point if we go all the way back and you just share a little bit about what it was like growing up for you. Are you from San Diego originally, or you just live there now?
No, funny story. I actually am an Iowa girl, and it's a very small town. The town that I spent most of my childhood in has about 400 people. And what's interesting is with my health and with my family trying to be able to work to pay the medical bills, we wound up moving around constantly. So I'm 32 now, and I've lived in 23 cities, and the majority of those were before I was 18. So, I mean, we bounced around quite a bit trying to find different hospitals, care centers.
And for anyone that doesn't know, you touched there briefly on your illness. Can you explain a little bit about what that was and I guess how that impacted on your childhood growing up?
Yeah, so cystic fibrosis is called a genetic disease, meaning you're born with it. So I just came straight out of the womb, and then 24 hours old, I got the diagnosis. What it does is it kind of strips you of all of your, there's a really thick mucus that builds up in your lungs and your organs. And for most people, the trouble becomes the lungs, and the infections begin. And your job then is to just cough it out and get it out of your body. And sometimes the infections are deadly. We can get an infection as simply as from like a plant or a piece of soil. It's really simple. It's, and we talk about now in COVID world, it's not like the infection has to come from anywhere. It can just come from the people in your home. And so isolation is a big thing in our community for those suffering from cystic fibrosis. And I believe the stat is if you're born today, you can expect to live to be about 24 years old. So it is a young person's condition. And I think it was like 1 or 2 years ago, was the first time there were more adults than children with the condition, because most of them just don't make it to adulthood.
Do you know the reason, I guess, why you ended up living past that predicted age rate? It's amazing. I think it's so incredible what you've done out of it, and we're going to touch on that a bit more. But what was that like growing up in and out of hospital all the time?
Yeah, I mean, so I didn't know it was different, right? Just the same way it's like, there's this study done on the bombings in Syria, and the first time, the kids look outside and they see the bomb, they're scared, right? And then over time, it just becomes part of life. And so for me, it became part of life. And I realized there's the shock value there. We estimate I've had 67 hospitalizations, some for as little as 1 day, some for as long as 6 months. And I didn't realize it was different per se. I mean, I knew that there was, the other kids didn't have to worry about the stuff I had to worry about, but like in a way it made us all connect a little deeper. It was always interesting. I didn't have to worry about being the boring kid. For a while I was kind of the loser though. And so like some of the times, I lived in my imagination, because when the visitor hours are over, you don't have friends. This wasn't a time for, when I was growing up, there wasn't Facebook, and MySpace had just started, but like we didn't have Zoom capabilities in the hospital room. And so I became very imaginative, and I started making up my friendships, which I sound like a quack. And that birthed really my creativity and my desire to speak and teach and educate and like I'd be educating all my toys on like how you put a needle in, you know, or how you disconnect your IV pump. And they became my friends in a way. And so as an adult, that really, I think a lot of times people ask, you know, how did you do it? Like, where did your success come from? And I'm like literally having conversations with my teddy bears after visiting hours.
I love that. That's like the definition of turning, you know, a bad situation on its head. And it's so incredible that you were able to do that for yourself and keep yourself going. But yeah, so you've built an amazing platform for yourself now that I love the idea behind, you know, it's all centered around helping people and inspiring people. Can you talk me through a little bit about, you know, how that came to be, why you wanted to dedicate your life to doing that kind of work? I know you wrote a book while you were in hospital, so maybe that's a good starting point. I'm not sure. It's your story, so I'll let you go for it.
Yeah. So I usually have a copy of the book, but we're sold out, so I can't show everybody. I do like this $8 special, and whenever I do that, like it's always on Amazon for anybody interested, but whenever I do the $8 special, we just like clear the room. So I don't have one today, but yeah, so it's interesting. And this is where I go into a little bit of advice giving. What I've always done, I remembered in 6th grade, well, it started in 4th grade. My brother beat me up, lovingly brother-sister fight.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I'm going to learn how to fight with my words while you fight with your fists, and we'll see who's better. You know, that little cattiness. And then in 6th grade, I started to learn, I remember we had to write a paragraph, right? And the first paragraph is your opening sentence, 3 supporting sentences, conclusion sentence. And we had a contest on who could write the best paragraph, and I won. And so I took that, and then I started writing all these little stories on the playground with my imaginary friends. Why am I telling you all this? I don't think this is like exclusive. Nobody else has ever heard these stories. Then they did this like thing in 7th grade where like everybody, you had an Excel spreadsheet. It was on paper, and you had to put down what you thought everybody's profession would be in the class. And then we passed it around and we created an aggregated list. And mine was writer and then speaker. Like that was it. And so when I started writing and I started speaking, the book did come from the hospital. I was just really bored, and I was on social media every morning and every night. I did recruiting for about 10 years, and because I wanted to make it, right? Like you can't just live off of writing and speaking, or so I thought. So I had to prove I could make it. And I learned marketing, I learned recruiting, I learned sales. And when I was starting to get hospitalized 6, 7, 8 months a year, I decided I'm not good to any company, and companies also decided I wasn't good enough for them. It's very expensive to keep that on payroll. And so I was fired from everything. And I was on Social Security Disability, which in the States is like the poor people programs. And suddenly I'm making less than $1,200 a month, which, you know, when you go from $10,000 a month to $1,200, you're like, what the heck? Or like now I'm couch surfing off of Craigslist. You know, I can't figure anything out. And the only thing I was good at was getting on social media and finding leads. And so I would do that in the morning and at night. And I turned into that, you know, I want to know what makes people successful. You know, how do I become rich? That was the story I told myself. So that's where the first book came out. How are there millionaires, billionaires, and Olympic athletes? And have they survived the tough times? Because I got to know. And so it became like an interview of the darkest days set around my backdrop of the hospitalization life. And after that, I talked to so many millionaires that I was like, I'm going to be a millionaire. And I made that decision. And here's what I did wrong. And I openly talk about this because it's a lesson I want everybody to get. I shifted away from my foundation. I'm a writer, I'm a speaker. So for a while I had and I still do, an online social media marketing course. And I was like, that's the business. And so I changed all my branding. I changed everything to sell Shark School, not realizing Shark School was something they could do. It wasn't the business. And then I was like, somebody had asked, you know, hey, do you want to do sales training for my company? And I'm like, I'm the world's greatest sales trainer. And so I went in that direction. And then somebody else was like, hey, can you still help me with recruiting? And I'm like, yes, I can help you with recruiting. And I did, oh gosh, there was like 8 little jobs in there too, because I was trying to find my path. And this is what nobody tells you. Your path's already in you. I had to find something to prove that I was better than what I was originally good at. And that was when it clicked for me. I write stories of inspiration and adventure, and I speak on stages. Outside of that, you know, if there's somebody who needs coaching, will I coach them? Sure, but I'm not a coach. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a coach you because I love you. You know, I'm not in the business of coaching. I'm not in the business of sales training. If your company brings me in to talk about sales and bringing the heart into the customer journey, sure, but I'm not a sales trainer. I write and I speak. And in some ways I kick myself because I got so caught up in making the money and having, and don't get me wrong, I love it, but I'll tell you what, writing and speaking pays more than any of those other jobs I tried. And it's interesting. We know who we are, and we know that in the core of who we are, our talents matter. It just comes down to, are you brave enough to trust your instincts? And I wasn't for a long time. And it's one of my biggest regrets. I wasted years trying to find the thing that would make it for me, not realizing I was the thing.
Do you remember, maybe was there a light bulb moment or a pivotal moment for you that you came to that realization that you didn't need to do all of these extra things, that you just need to focus on really what you loved and what your indented path was? Or how did you come to that realization?
Wow, you're brilliant, by the way. Your path has something to do with interviewing. And that's what's funny is like success leaves clues. So it was, I have a coach myself, and he had said to me, oh gosh, because I I hired him because I wanted to learn how to grow a coaching business. And then 6 months in, he's like, do you even like coaching? I'm like, no, but I just feel like I should be doing it. He's like, no. He's like, why did you just wait 6 months? I'm like, well, I just really want to be successful. And he goes, don't you know you already are? And he had said something like that clicked for me. And he goes, think of it like this. We both know your life expectancy may be cut short. If you were on your deathbed, what would be the work that you did that you were most proud of? Which is stupid, right? Because I know this. Intellectually, I know this. I tell people this. And I was like, well, I think there's lessons from the living, or from the dying that the living can learn. And I'm like, I'm tired of watching all my friends pass away. And like, there's nobody preserving their stories, and not even their memories per se, but like, what's the thing that they wish they did? And I was like, but that doesn't make a business. And he goes, okay, so who are you following right now on social media? Because who's in your feed is who you become, right? And I was like, a ton of marketers, ton of business people, ton of people who help scale corporations. And he goes, do you follow any artists? And I go, well, Joel Osteen and Ruby Carr. That's a famous preacher out of Lakewood, Texas, by the way. And then Rupi Kaur is an Indian poet, and she writes about like sex and love through poetry. It's beautiful stuff. And it occurred to me, the reason I'm struggling with my business is because I'm following marketers and business people. I'm not following true artists and successful artists. And I didn't even know you could become successful as an artist. Like you hear about that, but like that can't be me, right? And so the light bulb moment for me was really when I heard that information of, okay, well, who are you following and who do you want to be? And it clicked for me. And so I was like, okay, so I'm going to try it. And I just started testing it. I redid a little bit of the website to have some forest themes and some adventure themes in there because I'm an outdoors woman. And the forest, I freaking love, like the foggy forest in the morning, like that sets my soul on fire. And I started following the artists. And interestingly enough, I got 3 people. This is so stupid, but like, this is what success means when you're starting out, right? In 1 month, I'd been struggling so much to make it as a coach. And there was a while I was bringing in some good revenue from a coach, but like, it was always like, okay, coaching's over. Now I got to find another one. And I was on this hamster wheel. And I said, you know what? I got a couple people that I absolutely love coaching. I'm gonna keep them on board. And then I'm going to try the art side. Just try it, just to prove my coach wrong. That's it. And in the first month, I had 3 people opt into my email list and put, we have a suggested donation for what they perceive the value. Each one of them paid $105. Now, I know it's only $315, but it never came so easy was the point. Now, so what happens next? We don't know, right? This is all theory, but less stress, less anxiety. I'm doing what I'm doing. Some of the poetry that I write on Instagram only gets 70, 80 likes compared to, 1,500 to 6,500 likes for some of the other stuff right now. But like, it's a more genuine conversation with the followers. And I'm like, okay, I'm onto it. Now I'm chill. It's a lot more fun.
I guess, going more to the speaking side of things, I'm not sure if you were already doing this alongside venturing into the more artistic work or if that came after, but do you remember the first time you gave a talk to an audience and what that was like?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a ton for charities, right? Kiwanis clubs, CF groups. but I wouldn't say that that's speaking per se, right? Like, yes, there's a podium, you have a presentation to give. But the first time that I actually feel like it was my made it moment was actually only in 2016 fall. So it was almost 2017. And it was about 800 people. And I spoke about CF, and I drew the parallels between what it means to have CF and what it means to build a business. And that day I got signed to 2 bureaus. And so my fees went from, free to I'll take whatever I can get to just overnight, what the heck? And then that was when my downfall started, because I knew I was successful, but I misinterpreted what made that message good. I thought what made that message good was that I could hold my own in the business community. What I failed to recognize was what made that message good was the art and the passion and the creativity of what it was that I was talking about. And so that was when I started, after my first success, I jumped off course and did the sales training, redid the recruiting, got into Shark School, and I did 1,000 things because I wanted to get that message again. I wanted to get that message out there. And I thought if I just had a big enough business, I would. And the reality is nobody cared about me and my business abilities. Like, it's great that I have them. Nobody cares. And so that was when it was just like, oh, shoot.
And how do you think you recentered yourself and brought yourself back to that place that you're in now, having experienced it once already, I guess, fixing things, once over, but then accidentally falling back into it? How did you then turn everything around again and pick it all back up to where you wanted it to be?
When you know you're on the wrong track, don't just sit there. And so for me, transformation can happen in a moment. I really believe that. And I believe the world would be a much stronger, mentally resilient place if we realize that we are not trees, we can move. We always say in the next book I'm writing, it's called, each chapter has a theme. And one of the themes is impatience. A sense of urgency is the key to success. Everything now, nothing later. When you realize you're on the wrong track, get off it immediately. And so for me, when I had that realization, I hung up the call. And the first thing was I put a picture of trees on my website because I needed to blend the inspiration and adventure. Then I designed a brand new logo. And the thing is I didn't make an announcement telling anybody I was pivoting because it's embarrassing when you've pivoted 3,000 times. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna lose followers. I'm probably gonna lose revenue. I did. Good times. COVID happened. I'm like, ah. And then I was like, you know what? I'm gonna stay the course on this. And I'm gonna stay the course. And I told myself 2 years. No matter what, I'm gonna give it everything I have for 2 years. And I can tell you what, I've never been more calm and centered because now it's like, we're doing this. And it's, when I was doing sales training or recruiting or all these other social media, gosh, it sounds ridiculous. I was always like, at the end of the day, the Sunday scaries, I had Sunday scaries every day. And then I had somebody in my coaching program I was trying to help her quit her job and start her line of work and get her comfortable with it. And I realized on one of the calls, I'm like, I should be taking this advice, but you can't tell that to anybody as a coach. And so for me, when I made that realization, I just started that day. I made a couple massive changes and I didn't make any announcements. Hey, everybody, I'm making this direction in my business to this because nobody cares. They're going to start seeing what you post and they're going to start seeing the differences in how you post and how you show up and, the imagery, and the people who matter, who go to the website and enroll in the free master classes, they're going to see. There's no big announcements that need to be made. They'll either drop out of your opt-in list or, send it to their friends. And then I changed all my emails. So every single email became a lesson or a principle that the living can learn from the dying. And I'll tell you what, it was horrifyingly terrifying to send that first email to the entire database. But the feedback was overwhelming. Oh my gosh, I loved this. It hit me at the right time. I shared it with all my girlfriends. And I started getting more opt-ins. And I'm like, y'all, I'm just me. You guys like this? It was a little surreal. Okay, world, I hear you. I'm surprised you like this, but okay. But that's how I think success is.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think the more you talk to people, that are successful or who have felt the fear and did it anyway, as I like to say, a lot of it boils down to finally making that decision to just be yourself, which is so hard for all of us to do. I definitely wouldn't say that I'm 100% there, but it's crazy to see what can happen from talking to people like you when you do finally accept that. But leading on from that a little bit, what do you think maybe you did, or just in general, your thoughts on captivating an audience, whether it's in speaking or online, or, I think everyone is so intrigued to know, how do you make people listen, and then how do you make them stay?
I don't know where I was taught this. I'm sure I had to have been taught. Nobody has any, original ideas per se. The thing about writing, and I keep adjusting this because I feel like I go dark and then I go light, neither here nor there. What I tend to do in my writing is I take two seemingly completely different topics and I blend them. And a lot of what I say initially, people don't get. And so my first keynote that was very, very successful and widely, that I got signed to bureaus with, was, in what ways can entrepreneurs build a business which are the exact same ways in which patients can survive a hospitalization? Totally different concepts. And then I tell stories of, I'll start off with like the trail story, what it means to hike the trail. And you see that one tree that, there's all the trees in the forest, but then there's one tree that's kind of alone from all the other trees, but it's still growing and it's very sustenance, whether it's got the thicker bark to it, which means that it's withstood fires or whatever the have you. How is that one tree still standing so far away from all the other trees on your journey in the forest? And is it in the growing phase, the harvesting phase, the bloom phase, if you will? Is it wilting? Is it dying or decaying? And so now you're captivated, right? Because you're like, yeah, what is it about that one tree? But I'm going to leave you on that captivation. I'm going to talk to you about what it is as your life cycle. Are you in the point where you're being planted? You're coming from your father and your mother into the womb, and all the right culmination of the environment makes you planted, to the birthing, to the growing, right? Just like the tree. And then eventually you bloom, you harvest, you start to wilt, whether that's an idea in your head or an idea in your body. And then you start to decay, and then you start to die. After death, you decay further. And now there's a rebirth. And that rebirth isn't reincarnation, but that rebirth is who is feeding off of your decay. And drawing those parallels is where it's my everything. I love it. And so that's, those are the articles I'm sending out now, is like drawing that parallel between what's in nature and what's inside of fighting for our lives.
So the other aspect of all of this, I guess it ties into everything you do, is your interest in neurolinguistics. So I'd be really interested to hear a little bit more about that and why you wanted to pick that up and incorporate that into your method.
Yeah, so it's called neurolinguistic programming, neurolinguistics, neuroassociative conditioning. It has a bad rap. So naturally, I followed that rabbit hole so far that you can't see it on the wall, but I got really skilled at mental mapping and to listening to the words. And I love the study of language, right? Like we knew this in fourth grade. And so what I got really interested in is like, how is it we form words, and what is it about the way that we form words that affects our reality? And so I don't openly, and that was where all my coaching clients came, is they were like, yeah, we need to know more about NLP. And I was like, cool, I can teach you. But for me, it became the tool that I used a lot of in how I communicate and how I listen to others and how I pick up on patterns and everything we say. So take this idea. The word abracadabra is actually Hebrew, and it roughly translated as I create I create as I speak. And that's a fascinating thing. Like, how is it that abracadabra, which universally we know means magic, also means I create as I speak? It's very interesting as if you follow this thought. And so then I realized, okay, so every thought we have comes from the invisible. We can't see it, right? And then somehow it manifests through our language, and then enough language patterns, and that creates a reality. Like this cup wasn't a cup before somebody thought it and then said, I need to make this cup. And then boom, and then they had all the right situation, all that right culmination, and it became a cup. And so I started to see, like if it's not just a cup, if it's anything, if it's how closely you and I connect on this call, if it's some of, SpaceX launching, whatever the heck it is, what made them get to the point where that became the thought? And so I studied this stuff in depth, and that's what all the master classes are all the corporate training is on NLP, because it's the way in which our mind notices, categorizes, and leverages language to create the reality.
If you did have to say, in 5 months or in a year, in terms of your business and your mission with your work, what would you really like to see this platform do?
Beautiful question. So we are working on the second book. pretty excited about that. Just before the call, I was almost a minute late because I found a partnership with somebody who creates the artwork for it. Really, the goal is I want people to share my writings. I don't care about the monetization part of it for now. The book will speak for itself and the speaking fees, great. And I'm in a very blessed and privileged situation where I can take that time off to truly focus on building it. And by the way, taking time off does not mean I only work 3 hours a day. In many days, it's a 12-hour shift still. It's about being disciplined and being accountable to your own goals. But what the biggest compliment you can ever give an artist is if they've got a podcast, write a review. If they have an email that they encourage you to share the out of it. If they have a book, write the review on the book. That's how artists thrive and this. And so for me, that's the goal, is how many people's lives can I impact enough that takes them to write the reviews or share the message. And it could be simple as on social media. I just had a post about what it means to be a diabetic on there. The image was not a hit. The writing, pretty good. And so, the best part is when somebody shares that on their stories and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys got to read this. So I think that's the goal, is how many people share your message and people opt in to hear more. I think that's where the next 5-6 months is, because I still have speaking gigs online. It's weird. It's not the forefront. In a way, that's a sad thing, but in a way, it's the biggest blessing. I still do, I've probably done 10 speaking events on Zoom. So I think that's the goal. And it has to be the goal because it's also different than what I've ever done.
Do you have a personal definition of what the word success means to you?
I have to be real. It used to mean money. And in a way, it still does. I don't think I can ever get rid of that. And I'm fortunate enough that I've made enough that I can chill a little bit. But there's a term, and it's in my articles, so I'll hook you up. It's on what the definition of success was. And the ancient Hawaiians actually, and I studied a lot of Hawaiian culture because they were onto something. The ancient Hawaiians believed that success, the definition of success, was trusting your gut. And when I first heard that, I was like, that's so stupid. Give me a tactic. I was over it. And then I started listening and thinking about it. And I'm like, where have I not trusted my gut? And I'll tell you what, I'm more successful now than I've ever been. And I started following that principle.
If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you today, having been through everything you've been through in life, all the ups and downs, both personally and career-wise, what's the biggest piece of advice you'd give that 10-year-old self moving forward in life?
I think when I was 10, I could be wrong. I had an entire make-believe world called Terabithiana that I recruited all the other kids to play with. Anyway, so honestly, if I was talking to her now, I'd be like, always trust those little voices in your head. They knew what was up before I knew what was up. You know what I mean? And it's so interesting how I think there's a book out by one of my dear friends called John O'Leary. And the book is In Awe, and it talks about how to reconnect with your childhood self. And maybe it's just the journey I'm on right now. That's cool. But there was always something about that creative spark inside me. And I shut it down for so freaking long. And it's by far my biggest regret.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your buckets of wisdom. It's been so interesting to talk to you and so much fun as well. Thank you so much for sharing all of those intimate stories with me. I really do appreciate it.
Of course. And you keep doing you, girl.
Thank you so much for listening. And as always, please rate, share, and leave a comment if you like what you hear. And don't forget to follow @WhatIt'sLikePod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Klyn's journey and to read her book, visit the links provided in the show notes. I'll be back on Thursday with more inspiring stories, but for now, this has been What It's Like with Luz.